The first and most obvious reason has always been physical superiority. Historically, Africans were recognized for their unmatched strength, endurance, and charisma. This wasn't just physical ability for labor, but a natural aura of resilience and vitality that made them stand out everywhere they went. Europeans, observing this, realized that if black people were given equal space in society, whether in governance, military, or even athletics, they would quickly outshine others. So, a deliberate inversion of values took place. Where once physical power symbolized leadership and nobility, colonizers rebranded it as primitive and inferior. Instead, fragility and distance from physical labor became the new definition of civilized. Ancient Greek philosophers like Aristotle fed into this by writing that some people were natural slaves, and this philosophy was weaponized during colonial times to justify the subjugation of black Africans. Enslaved black people were subjected to harsher punishments than others, with the false claim that they were less sensitive to pain. But the truth was always clear: physical superiority terrified non-blacks, and so they built entire systems to suppress what they could never match. Yet, even deeper than physical strength was another fear that haunted Europeans and Arabs alike: the fear of genetic annihilation. Science makes it undeniable: African genes are dominant. Whenever a black African had children with a non-black partner, those children almost always carried strong African features, whether in skin tone, hair texture, or facial structure. This reality sparked panic in societies obsessed with racial purity. In America, this led to the infamous one-drop rule: if even one ancestor in your bloodline was black, you were classified as black, with all the discrimination that entailed. Why such strictness? Because non-blacks feared that over generations, their identity would be swallowed by the strength of African genes. In their eyes, allowing free mixing meant the eventual disappearance of their race. This wasn't paranoia, but biology, and they knew it. While in Latin America or parts of the Arab world, interracial unions sometimes produced children who could assimilate into the dominant culture, in Europe and North America, the fear of losing whiteness was so strong that it fueled centuries of segregation, anti-miscegenation laws, and violence. The truth was simple: black Africans were not seen as genetically weak, they were feared for being genetically strong. But perhaps the most powerful truth lies in Africa's role as the cradle of humanity. All fossil evidence, all anthropological research, all genetic testing points to one undeniable fact: humanity began in Africa. The first humans walked on African soil, developed tools, formed communities, and gave rise to civilization itself. From Africa, humans migrated outward into Asia, Europe, and eventually every corner of the globe. This means one inescapable truth: every human alive today is descended from Africans. Modern genetic testing even shows Europeans carry between 4% and 20% of their DNA linked to African groups. Yet, this truth has always been resisted by non-blacks, because it undermines the myths of superiority built over centuries. To admit that Africa is the origin of humanity is to admit that the very people labeled inferior were in fact the original, the ancestors of all. This dismantles the illusion of European centrality and recenters Africa as the heart of the human story. That is why hostility exists, because history, science, and biology all point to a truth that threatens the myths carefully constructed by non-blacks. And then, there is the matter of wealth. Africa has always been the richest continent on Earth, blessed with an abundance of gold, diamonds, oil, fertile land, and countless other natural resources. Ancient Arab scholars wrote about this wealth in awe. Al-Fazari, for example, described Ghana as the city of gold, where kings possessed riches beyond imagination. Later, empires like Mali and Songhai grew into economic powerhouses, trading across the world and leaving behind legacies of prosperity. Mansa Musa, ruler of Mali, remains to this day the wealthiest individual in recorded history. For outsiders, this level of prosperity was intolerable. How could Africans be so wealthy while Europe struggled in poverty? Instead of respecting or collaborating with African kingdoms, Europeans chose to plunder them. Colonization was never about spreading civilization, it was about organized theft. France, Britain, Spain, and Italy carved up Africa, drained its resources, and enslaved its people. They then spread propaganda that Africans were too primitive to manage their own wealth, all while enriching themselves with stolen gold and diamonds. Even today, traces of this exploitation remain. France still controls massive reserves of African gold, and African nations are trapped in economic systems where their priceless resources are exchanged for meaningless paper currency. The hostility, once again, was not born of African weakness, but of African abundance. Put all of this together: physical superiority, genetic dominance, ancestral primacy, and immense natural wealth, and the story becomes crystal clear. Black Africans were not suppressed because they were weak or uncivilized. They were suppressed because they were too strong, too advanced, too resourceful, and too central to the human story to be ignored. Non-blacks built elaborate systems of racism, discrimination, and cultural erasure, not to highlight African inferiority, but to hide African superiority. And this fear never disappeared. It simply changed form. Today, instead of open enslavement, we see tokenism, where one black person is placed on a panel, in a film, or in a corporate office to give the illusion of equality. We see stereotypes in media designed to reinforce outdated ideas. We see economic arrangements that continue to drain African wealth into European banks. The hostility has always been about control, and that control has always been threatened by African greatness. History, however, is louder than lies. Fossils, DNA, ancient manuscripts, and oral traditions are all testifying to the truth that can no longer be hidden. Africa is the birthplace of humanity, the foundation of civilization, and the most resource-rich land on Earth. Black Africans are not a footnote in history, but its central characters, people whose strength, resilience, and creativity shape the world. The hostility of non-blacks, both past and present, is nothing more than the echo of fear of a truth too powerful to deny. So the real question is not why hostility exists. The answer is clear: it was always fear of black greatness. The real question is, what happens when the world finally accepts the truth? What happens when Africa takes its rightful place at the center of human history, not as a victim of colonization, but as the origin of civilization itself? These are questions that will define the future. And with that, we come to the end of today's episode. If you found this discussion eye-opening, don't just keep it to yourself like this video. Share it with your friends and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode, because we are committed to bringing back the stories that history tried to bury. This is not just about history. It's about identity, truth, and power. Stay tuned, because the journey of rediscovering African civilization and Black excellence has only just begun. Until next time, stay curious, stay strong, and keep questioning the stories you were told.